Welcome to Microsoft Word 2019 Lesson 3 by Megan Reese. This lesson is about space utilization, the way that we use space on a page in Word and how you can get that space, how you can use it properly. So the main three things we're going to be talking, first of all, is line spacing, how we make lines move apart, like how far apart they are from each other. But also we're going to be talking about columns, tabs, and tables, which can look incredibly close but are completely different and are used in completely different ways. Looking at this paper right here, this is in Word, and I just put it in print preview, so you can't really see any details here. But it's the same list of names, okay? And they look pretty close. Some of them don't line up exactly perfect, but they look identical for the most part, okay? And so the difference is that one of these sets of names used a table, one of them used tabs, and one of them used columns. And by a printed page, you cannot tell which is which. So if I wanted to get names into this formation, which do I choose? Is it better to use a table? Is it better to use tabs? Is it better to use columns? Sometimes it doesn't matter, but you do have to understand how each of them work. And if you understand how they work, then you'll kind of know, okay, well, in this particular situation, it would make more sense to use a table or a column or whatever. Now, if I go out of print preview, you can see a little bit better what I did here, okay? So in the very first one, you can see this is a table, okay? That's why I put it in print preview, because you can see it's a table. I just removed the borders so that you can't see it when it's printed. But when it's in this version, you can see it. So this is just a table that I created, okay? And they're each in their own box. You should be quite familiar with tables by now, because all of the lessons that you've been doing all this time I've been using tables, right? You've seen that a lot, okay? So this one was done with tabs, okay? You can see in the tabs up here, right here in the tabs, that I just literally typed it in, press tab, okay, and then the next one and press tab. This one is in columns, and if I click on here, you can see up here that there are 3 columns. So they can look totally different. They might have the same outcome, but again, it depends on what my needs are that will help me know which one to pick, okay? So that's going to be our focus today, is learning how to change our spacing. For example, this was originally spaced in the standard spacing that comes as a default in Word, and it looked like this, right? So you can tell the difference now because these are single spaced and these are not, right? So we're going to learn about how to change the spacing as well so that they look more like this, so they're up close to each other, okay? So let's go ahead and get started with today's lesson. We're going to be talking first about paragraph spacing. So I'm going to get a new page in Word. And this is actually one of my own personal pet peeves in Word that I really hate, is that when I start typing in Word and I press enter, it's automatically, the default setting is to give me not single space, okay? It's going to be set, I don't even know what it's normally set to, multiple, 1.08. Why it's set to that is beyond me. I really wish they would fix that. To me, the default should be that it's set to 1 inch so that when I press enter, there's no space in between, okay? So what I do is actually change my default. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to layout, and you'll see this is how you can tell. Your indents are set to 0, but this after is always set to 8. If I change that to a 0, everything's going to be single spaced now. And when I press enter, it's going to be single spaced instead of 1.08 spaced. Now, if you don't care, no big deal, but if it bothers you like it does me, what I do is I change this. I do Control A, I set this to a 0, I come into paragraph, and I actually set it as my default, so I never have to deal with it again because I think it's a stupid setting, but you can do that if you want, but you don't have to. But if you set it as a default, is it just this document? Is it all documents? And then what they're doing is it'll make it so that every time you pull it up from now on, it's not going to do that, okay? And you can do that if you want, but so that's what the spacing is, okay? So notice that when I want to change my spacing, yes, I can go in here to get rid of this after location, but I also can go to home and I can click on this one, or I can click on this little arrow next to paragraph. I think it gets me to the exact same place. Unless I go here, line spacing options, see, same place. And this is where I can set my line spacing. So I can come in here and say I want it double spaced, I want it 1.5 space, single spaced, or I can custom it. And when I took the MOS test for Word a few weeks ago, this was one of the questions. I had to set it to 1.4. That was literally on the MOS test. So that when I press enter, it does what I want, okay? Okay, so I just pulled in a random paragraph. You probably noticed how much I love this random paragraph generator. I use it a lot. This is single spaced, okay? I can tell because, well, I don't know, it said, oh, this is going to be in between. So If I come in here and I go to home, I can set it to 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, or again, I can go into custom and set it myself, however I want it to be, right? There's also a shortcut. Control 2 will give you double spaced. Control 1 will give you single spaced, okay? And again, because I pasted this in, it pasted it in single space, but notice that when I press enter, it automatically put a space between the paragraph, which I might not necessarily want that, because why did it do that? Because this is still set to 8, right? But if I do Control A and I get rid of that to 0, then when I press enter, I can press enter twice, and it puts the code of an enter in there. Okay. So again, it's a personal preference, but it's important you understand why it does that, because a lot of times I'll notice my students, they're doing their assignment and they can't get it to fit on the page. And yet in my example, it fits on the page. And a lot of times it's because this is still set to 8 and it's just enough to make it hard to make everything fit. So I like to remove it entirely. Another thing you can do is indentation, which is also in paragraph, and this is where you can decide what the indentation is going to be. So I can say, oh, I want it to be indented, 5 in from the left, and maybe 2 from the right or something. Probably won't be anything left if I do that much, but okay. And then I click OK, and it puts like an indent there. This is the cursor that's the indent button right here. Okay, so when you look along here, you're going to see these little arrows, and they can be moved. Okay. And those are the things that make you have an indentation. So you can do it by hand with this, okay? Whereas this is the actual margin, okay? So you got your margin here, and then your indentation here. So for example, in lesson 1, we did an outline, right? We did 1 period tab, we typed stuff in, remember? Okay, so in indentation, you can come in here and you can move this, right? You can actually, I'm gonna highlight them all so they all change together, okay? But I can actually choose that my indentation should go out further, and I have control over how far apart these are going to be from each other. So that's what your indentation is, but you can also come in here to set a specific indentation if you need it. All right, we're going to move on to tabs, and tabs can be a little frustrating. The first thing you have to understand about tabs is that tabs go horizontal, whereas columns go vertical. So coming back to this page here, when I typed this in, I typed it in horizontally first. Okay, I had to type Tanya Crab, then Anne, then Tula, and then the next row. So you have to type it going across this way. Okay, so like for example, let's add a new line. Okay, I type in a last name, and when I press tab, then I press tab to get to the next one, right? So a lot of times when you're doing giant lists of names, actually tabs are a lot better. They also have a lot more freedom, okay? Because I can move this really easily. So you kind of want to highlight everything, but I can move my edges. And so I have a lot of freedom after I've set it exactly where I want those tabs to be, which I'm not going to be getting from columns, okay? But a lot of problems I have with kids is that they'll set their tabs and then they'll do this whole row. They'll just type these in, and then they go to type these in and it doesn't. They're like, oh, wait, how do I do that? So you have to remember to always type horizontally, whereas in a column, you're going to put all of these in, and then when that runs out of space, it'll go up here, and then when that runs out of space, it'll go up here, right? In fact, you can really see that here because the horizontal versus the vertical, because in this one, originally it was just a list of names, right? In the column, it took the first 5 names, and then the next 5, or how many that is, 6 names, first 6 names, then the next 6, then the next 6, right? It did it vertically, okay? This one did it across this way. So Tanya Crab's the first name, but then Ann Jackson, see how it goes across? Okay, so this one did it vertically, put them in that order. And that's just the difference, right? This is horizontal, okay? Tabs are horizontal, columns are vertical, right? So it can be a little tricky. So setting your tabs, you're definitely going to need to have this toolbar on. If you don't have it on, make sure you go to view and turn on your ruler so you can see that, because you're going to be using it a lot. Okay. So there are technically 5 kinds of tabs. There's one called a bar tab, which I think is kind of funny. And I've never used it. In fact, I didn't even know what it did. So we're not going to really go into that one, but it basically just puts a line between each tab. But we're not going to go into that one, although you're welcome to play with it. So to get to tabs, that is another beef I have with Word, is there is no button for tabs. You can add one. We'll go into that in a later lesson, how to add new buttons onto this. But the way to get to it is under paragraph right here, there's a little arrow, and then you go to tabs. So it's kind of a roundabout way. Just to find it is kind of irritating. All right, so once we're in tabs, it's asking where I want to set it. So 1 inch, 1.5, 2 inches, right? So if I say I'm going to set it at 2 inches, okay? So that means it's going to appear right here when I press tab, Because if you don't have tabs, it'll just do every 5, right? That's standard. But once you set tabs, all those every 5 go away, okay? So I'm gonna set one at 2 inches, and then I gotta decide what kind I'm going to do, okay? Left, center, right, or decimal. So left tab means that it's gonna type from the left position. So I'm gonna set that. Make sure you push set, don't forget, if you don't see it down here, it didn't set. I click OK, and I see the little L right there, meaning I have a left tab there. So now when I press tab, when I start typing, it's going to type from the left margin, okay? Now I'm gonna press enter again, and I'm gonna go back to my tabs, and I'm gonna change this, I'm gonna click on it and change it to a center tab and set again. So now, if you look at when I click OK, the image changed. So now, even though it's still set in the same spot, when I press tab and I start typing, it types from the middle so that no matter what I type, it centers it. Okay, so let's do the same word. So I'm gonna do Microsoft, okay, and I'll do Microsoft. Okay, so again, set it 2 inches both times. Notice when I click up here, I see my other tab. Now when I press enter, that tab's gonna follow. It's gonna still be there. Okay, it's not up here, but on the next line, that tab is still there. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my paragraph and to my tabs, and I'm gonna click on that 2-inch tab. Now I'm gonna change it to a right tab and set. Okay, so click OK, press tab, same spot, but this time it's gonna be typing from the right out. So this one went from the left out, this one went from the center, and this one went the other direction. Okay, so those are 2 different ones. Now the last one, I'm gonna go into tabs and change my 2-inch tab, this time to a decimal set. Now this one, if you just type normal, it's gonna look like a right. It won't be any different. But if you add a decimal point, see that? So when you put the point in, so it's really for when you do numbers, right? So if I say, you know, $4 or $5, right? And then I do $100, see, it'll align at the decimal point. No matter how big the number is, it's gonna align at that decimal point, okay? So those are the 4 kind of tabs that you're gonna learn how to. Now, if you wanted to set multiple tabs, okay, I can go into tabs here, and I can say I want one at 2 inch. So let's say I want this one to be set at 2, and then I'd like to do a 4-inch tab that's a center here, and maybe a 6-inch tab that's a right set here, and a 7 point, well, I don't think I can go that far, 6.3, that's a decimal tab set. Okay, now I can see all my tabs, and I might be like, oh, I need to make that smaller. I'm going to move this one over. I can adjust it after the fact, which is really nice. It's very hard to do that with columns. Even with tables, you can't do decimals like that. You have to type everything in. So I can type something, tab, type, oh, okay, hold on. I missed that because I didn't type first. Tab, then type, okay, and it's doing what I told it to do. Okay, when I press enter, it's going to follow. So when you set a tab, it sets it from wherever your cursor is down. It's not going to go retroactive and put it behind your cursor. So you have to pay very close attention where your cursor is. Sometimes if you've already typed stuff in, let's say you have this typed in and then you're like, oh crap, maybe I have a bunch of stuff in here. Okay. And then I realize, oh, dang it, I don't want it there. I want it in a different place. You're probably gonna wanna highlight it and then change it, because if you just put your cursor here, okay, and change it, it'll probably, see, it's only changing it for the second row. It's not gonna get that first row. So you wanna highlight them both and then change it so that it makes the changes all the way across, okay? Now it is dangerous when you do that. See how when I click on this, if you click off of it, if you click in the wrong spot, let's say I click right next to it, I just set a new tab, okay, which I may not have meant to do it. And also, if I want to get rid of a tab, I could just grab it and drag it off, and it will delete it that way, okay? Now there is another shortcut to setting tabs, and that's using your tab bar, okay? So I'm going to come in here. I don't know if there's I guess I can do this just to get rid of them, right? I'm going to close them all out. Instead of going in and clearing them, I'm just going to drag them off the bar. So I can set tabs without having to go in here, because sometimes I don't know what position I want it to be at. I just want to eyeball it. So I might be like, okay, I want one. Sometimes I'll just say, okay, I want one just roughly here. I want one here, and I want one here, right? And I set it without even having to go in and look at the number, okay? But they're going to just set all left tabs, okay? And that might be fine. That might be all you want to do. You set your tabs. Now you can come in and say, okay, but actually I want this one to reset as a center. Click OK, it will change it, right? Like there, okay? Or you can set it that way to begin with. So I can come in here and I can say, okay, this right here, that's my left tab. So I want that to be a left tab. If I click on it, oh, that's center. And then I can click on it again, make it a right tab. Click on it again. That's decimal. Looks like a center, but it has a little dot right there. Okay. So that's a way you can set it directly from, without having to open up the tab menu. Okay. Now, the problem with that is that you can't do dot leaders that way. I would have to go in and do the dot leaders after the fact. So we're going to talk about what dot leaders are right now. So dot leaders are when you have dots that go from one thing to the next. Okay. So if I change this right here, this 2-inch one, to have dot leaders right there. It's just generally the one that people use. And I do set and okay. Then when I type something in, go to my first tab here, and I press tab, it puts in dots. Okay. So it's like, you see that a lot when you have programs and, which we're doing a program for lesson 4. But so the one thing I want you guys to be aware of is that if you come in here and then you do period, because I get kids doing this all the time where they just go period space. Can you tell the difference? It does not look the same, okay? Or if you just do period, 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 okay? I don't know if you guys can tell, but when my kids print this, I can always tell the difference. It looks different when it's printed. I can always tell. So make sure that you are not doing it. This way takes longer anyway. Trust me, it takes longer to sit there and print and push a bunch of periods in a row than it's just set a tab to do it for you automatically. Because then when I press enter and I do the next one, I got to do all the periods again. It's ridiculous. Or I could just press the tab key, be done with this. So just learn to do it correctly. You're going to be using these in this assignment and also the next one. Okay, lesson 4 is going to be using a lot of these same concepts. Lesson 4 uses tabs, columns, and tables. So you're going to want to make sure you learn how to do that. Okay, so if I have set these with my ruler and I want a dot leader, I can double click on it and I can add a dot leader to it after the fact. Okay. But you can't set a dot, as far as I know, you can't set a dot leader directly from the ruler. You still have to go in here. But that is a shortcut to just double click on one of these and it'll get you in, okay? Or even just right around it. It'll get you in for the most part if you click in the right spot. But you usually set a tab, so you don't always want to do that. Okay, so what if you have a list of names like I had before? I just had to do this a minute ago to set up this whole other page. And you want to put them in tabs. Okay, so I have this giant list of names. I want them to be in tabs. So I'm just going to always highlight the names first so that you know what's going to apply to the entire section. And I want my first one here. Oh, let's see, it gave me a decimal tab, which I don't want. So I'm going to change this to, I like to just eyeball it instead of going in if I can avoid it. So I'm going to do one here. Well, actually, maybe I'll just only tap the second one. So I'll do one here and I'm going to do one here. Okay, so now the first one's not tabbed in and then the second two are done. But how do I get this to go into my tabs? So I'm going to press the delete key. Make sure you know the difference between a delete and a backspace. It's not the same thing because delete means you're going forward and backspace means you're going backward from the cursor. And what I want to delete is the enter that is between Tanya and Anne. So when I press delete, see if I press backspace, I'm just going to delete the A, right? If I do delete, I'm going to delete that enter and bring Anne up. Then I can press tab. Okay. Now I need to get to the end of the word Jackson, which I could just type. I could just click over there, but a lot of kids don't even realize if you look up on the keys on your keypad that are above the arrow keys, there's a button that says end. If you push end, it'll just get you to the end of that thing. Now I press delete, tab, and then I'm using my arrow to go back down. I don't want to do an enter. If I do an enter, it'll add an extra thing. So I'm just going to use my arrow key and then end. I'm going to do delete, tab, end, delete, tab, down, delete, tab, end, delete, tab. Oops. Sometimes you get a little off. Delete, tab, end, delete, tab, down, delete, tab, end, delete, tab, down. And you can pretty quickly get it into the rows. And then you might be like, oh, I didn't get that centered the way I wanted it, so I'm going to grab this one and move it over, okay? In your assignment, it gives you like an example. Let me actually show you in the assignment so you know what I'm talking about. It gives you something that it wants you to recreate, okay? Okay, so it looks like this, okay? And it asks you to recreate this. And I don't mean to recreate like the word, like you have to type the words in, but like the color of the font and the bold, I don't care about that. But how do I set that? So this is one where you're going to want to use it manually, where you just go, okay, this is probably I think this one's a right. Okay, so I'll change it later to a right. But where you just go in and you set it generally where you think it should go. You just kind of do a rough set, kind of like that. Like this is going to be a center, so I want it right in the middle. And then I can just go back in and set each one and change that one to a center and, and fix each one and add the dot leaders and everything. And then when I'm done, I should be able to type the entire thing in and make it look exactly like that. Okay. Although you don't need to change the font. All right, we're going to take a look at tables, and tables can be a lot more, probably the easiest to use of the three. They're very easy to set up and organize. And then you can remove the backgrounds and you can remove the borders and make it look like it's not a table at all. However, there are certain things you can't really do in table, like you can't tab in, because if you tab, you go to the next one. And putting a picture in is very difficult. I don't know if you've noticed, like in my directions, I don't know if I have one in this particular lesson, but if I want to pull a picture in, see how it just kind of pulls it in and leaves extra space. It just, I don't know. It can be really difficult to do images inside a table. Definitely, you can't get the words to wrap around an image. So a table is not always going to be the best choice, especially if you're doing a lot of text. When you have a table, the first thing it asks you to do in your assignment is to delete a table. There's a little icon right here. And it's a pretty useful little icon that lets you do a lot of things directly to the table. Change the font size. It lets you do it all at once, does the same thing to the entire table all at once. It also lets you delete the whole table or delete certain columns or certain rows. Okay, so if you want to delete it or if you want to move it, if you pick it up, you can move it really easily if you grab this and move it. Okay, or you can use it to delete the table or delete certain rows or whatever. So that's one thing to know about tables. Okay, next is how to insert a table. So we're going to go to insert and table, obviously, insert table. And there's a couple of options here. Mostly you're going to either draw it or you're going to go to insert table and actually type in how many columns and rows you want to do. And those are the two main ones that you're going to need from here. So once you have your table, you can draw, you can merge and join. So merging is when you highlight certain areas. Okay, these are your rows, and you right click and you merge those cells together into one. You can also do it this direction where you merge them. And you might say after the fact, oh, I don't want that. I want to split that. So I can right click and I can split the cells. Now here it just says how many columns. Well, maybe I don't want to split it. I want to split rows. But notice it won't let me split it 3 ways. That's because there's 4 here. So it'll only let me do in increments of 2 or 4, right? So that lets me split that. That happens to me a lot in here. You'll notice that's what I did in all of your tables, is every time I'm done creating a section, I merge this together. But sometimes I'm like, oh, wait, that's not going to be part of B3. So I have to go back in and I have to split this into how many there are, 7, right? And then I can remerge it. So it's kind of a pain, actually. Once you've joined it, to unjoin it, to undo what you just did. So that's splitting. And like here, I can split it, okay, like this, and I have 2 columns there, okay. So that's how you would split something. Another one is if you want to insert columns or rows. So let's say I'm like, oh, I want one more column over here. So I'm going to highlight it where I want it to go, and I'm going to do right click, insert columns to the left or columns to the right. And it lets me insert. And notice my merge isn't going to be there though, so I may have to insert and remerge it, right? Or if I want to add new columns, the easiest way is just go to the bottom and just tab, and it will let you add more. But what if I want it in the middle? Maybe I've got information in here and I need one more. Happens to me all the time when I'm writing your directions. So I would highlight this one and insert rows above or rows below, right? And that allows me to add new ones. And you can also, if you click in just the right spot right there, it'll let you add one as well. That's a little shortcut. You can move the columns over. So if you put your cursor on it, it turns into a two-sided arrow, and you can move it across to whatever size you want it to be. But notice when you do that, it moves it all the way down. But what if I don't want it to move it all the way down? I want to stagger it. Okay, staggering is a little tricky, but what I would do is I would highlight a section of it and then move it. It allows me to move only pieces. Or you just have to make sure that the actual cell is highlighted, and then you can actually move the edges for just that cell. And sometimes you do it by accident, and if you have it like this and then you decide, oh, I want to move this across, and you're like, oh crap, I had it highlighted, it didn't work, So that's how you stagger stuff, and you have to do that in the assignment. And it's a little tricky. When I was going through and doing the solution video for it, it took me a bit of time to create this, but hopefully now you have enough that you know how to do it. My suggestion is, after you've merged this, just do one row at a time. Just take it one row at a time. Get it as close to that as you can. And then you're going to stagger one that looks like this, right? Now there's this thing called distribute columns, and this one's kind of a mess to do it in, so I'm going to create a new one down here. So if I have something like this and I decide to put something small in here, like 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, oops, I pushed enter. I got to push down instead of enter, okay? So I move this over, so it doesn't need to be as tight, but I want all of these to be even. You can do what's called distribute columns, where you just highlight this, you right click, and distribute columns evenly, and it will automatically snap it back to be even. Now the problem with that is if you have a header in it, I don't know why this makes a difference, but let's say these are merged, okay? Now when I try to distribute columns, it's not there. It's no longer an option, okay? At that point, I have to go up to, in Table Tools, I got to go to Layout, and Distribute Columns is right here, okay? So you have to find it that way. I don't know why. It's just the way the powers that be tried to do it. So the next one is styles. Styles, we haven't really talked much about styles, and it's something you definitely need to know, especially for MOS, because they're everywhere. If you look in one of these ribbons and you see a bunch of stuff like this that takes up a ton of room and it's just weird, those are styles. Okay, see, styles. These are styles. Okay, I remember on the MOS test I took recently, I had to know the difference between when I would use this type and when I would use this type. And we'll get to that in a future lesson. But tables also have their own set of styles right here, okay, in the design tab. And so you can pull it down and you can choose what style you want your table to be. And it just kind of is a little shortcut so you don't have to take the time to shade it. And they all have names. If you hover over it, it'll give you the name. I believe in your assignment you have to do this one, list table 4. It took me forever to find it even when I had made the assignment myself, so I'm pointing it out. So you can just choose a style and then it's set up for you. Also, it lets you do some stuff over here. So like a total row, all it does is it makes the last row look different. It gives it like a giant equal sign. It's not like Excel. If you've done Excel, when you do a total row, it will actually do the math and total up the numbers. Word doesn't do that. Word doesn't do math. All it does is change the formatting. And then last column, you can make it look different depending on what type of style you have, banded columns. So if you've done Excel, it's very similar. If you haven't done Excel, then it'll look familiar when you get to Excel because it's a very similar thing. You can also change your borders and stuff over here. We're not going to really do that in the assignment, but no, you can change your border color and style and stuff over here as well. All right, when we were doing tabs, I showed you how to take a giant list of names and turn them into, tab them, right? So I want to make sure I highlight the whole thing like this, okay? And then I'm going to go to Insert Table, Convert Text to Table. Now, here you got to pay attention because you got to know what is separating. How does our Word know what's separating each thing? Okay, so first I'm going to say that I want like 4 columns or 5 columns, but they're really not. They're really paragraphs, right? Each one it could be a whole paragraph or it's just a line, but there's an enter in between each one. And paragraphs are separated by an enter. So I'm going to say paragraphs. I'm going to decide how many columns I want. And then when I click OK, boom, it's going to be into columns, okay? Now, if I had a list like, Megan, and then I did tab 1 and James tab 2 or whatever, okay? Because this one is divided by a tab. So if I were going to go to insert this one into a table, okay, convert text to table, I would do tabs. And I already figured it out. I would do tabs. How many columns do I want? Maybe 3. And now it's going to be able to find it because of tabs, right? And now what if, okay, one more I'm going to show you, and that's if there's a space, okay? What if what's dividing it is a space, okay? So I'm going to go to table and convert to table, and I'm going to go to other, and then in this little box, I'm going to type a space, okay? I'm actually going to put a space in there. Click OK, and it works just fine, okay? So that's how you convert to a table. The other one is going the other way around. How do I take something that's already in a table and convert it to text? And this one's harder just because it's harder to find. So I'm going to highlight the table. You have to go to Table Tools and then to Layout, okay? And in Layout, I'm going to go to Convert to Text, and I have to decide here what's going to separate it, and I'm not even sure which one's going to work. Oh, that one worked. Okay, so you just got to play with it. But that's how you can take out a table that already exists. Okay, another thing you can do is auto fit. It's very similar if you've used Excel where you double click and you make everything just fit perfectly. You actually can do that in Word. So I'm going to highlight this whole table. I'm going to go to Table Tools and Layout. And then right here, there's a little thing called Auto Fit. I just click on that. I want to auto fit the contents. So I want it to fit around the things that are inside it. When I click on that, it automatically fixed it so that this Wadsworth Rochelle now fits on the page, right? I could also do to window, which I guess will make it wider. I don't even know what this one does. No idea. You can also change the actual width. This was on the MOS test, and I think I actually missed it because I didn't know how to do it. So I had to look it up and make sure I've got it. So that would be table properties, okay? So what table properties is when you right click and you go down to table properties, you can decide exactly how wide you want the column to be, or you can even type it in up here apparently, okay? So that might even be better. So I can say, oh, I want the width to be, 1.5 or something, and it will automatically change it to exactly the width that you want it to be, okay? And I suppose you can also change the height. Look at that. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Notice what happened here. See how it got off and it's off the page? Generally, I just grab this. This is another place you can go to change the size. Sometimes you can't reach it very well, so you can always go to the ribbon up here. But that allows you to kind of pull that edge in if it gets off the page. Usually that's the best way to get it off the page. Okay, and then we're going to look at alignment. So I'm gonna do up here. I'm gonna merge this, and I type something in, like schedule. Okay, but I want it to go the other way. Okay, which is what I did again on your directions here. So everything goes sideways. Okay, and that saved me a lot of space to do it this way instead of having it go the other way. It would have had a lot more empty space. So what I do, again, this is going to be in layout, and I just do cell direction, and you just keep clicking it till it goes the direction you want it to be, okay? But it's no longer centered, right? So I'm going to go into, sorry, there we go. Right here, there's a little align center that lets me put it right in the middle. Okay, again, this is all in Table Tools under Layout. So if there's something weird in tables that you're not sure how to do, it's probably going to be in Layout, okay? Even cell margins, you can come in here and make your margins less and stuff. I've never really used that, but that's kind of cool that it's there. So that's, and here's properties as well. If you want to do table properties, I told you to right click and go to table properties, but you can also go to it right there. So FYI. And then again, I already talked about moving a table, but now that I have several tables, I can click on this and actually move it to be above the other one. Okay, see how that works? So that's the quickest, easiest way to move a table. One other thing I wanted to show you that I lied. You can do math in Word, and I have to be honest, I just figured this out, so I'm changing your assignment to make it fit. Which is like if I wanted a total here, there's a formula here. It's so cool. So I can do formula. It honestly knows, oh, you want me to sum everything that's above that. I can click OK, and it will actually do the math for me. So in your assignment, that will be something you have to do is to get a total. So you can actually do a formula. I assume it's pretty simple, but right inside Word. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to columns now. And columns, let's do a little introduction here. Columns are tricky because they do one side and then the other. So if I have a new document here and I want to have my information in columns and I start typing stuff, I'm not going to get to that second column until I fill this one completely up. Okay, I have to fill this whole column before I can get to the right side column, and that can be tricky if you and columns are also mostly for text. If you're doing a lot of text, that's when you're going to use columns. The way I use them over here with the names, I probably wouldn't use a column for that in a normal situation, although I might, because it puts them in an order I might not like. I don't know, it just depends on what you're doing. But columns can be tricky when you want to have like regular text, and then you want to put a text box, and then you want to do columns, and then it's hard to stick columns in the middle of a document and then have no columns above or below. It's absolutely possible. It's just a little tricky, and we're going to actually learn how to do that today. But let's take a look at a typical, some information here. I just grabbed some random paragraphs, and I'm going to insert some columns. So it's a good idea to highlight it. If I put my cursor at the top of the page, and I just grab, so I'm going to go to layout or design, I always forget where it's at, layout, and I just do, 2 columns. It will just do it from the top, and you can tell in here that that's what it's done. What if I have a title? What if it's like, the newsletter or something? Okay, and that's my title, and it's centered, and it's great big, and I don't want I don't want this to be included in my column. So if I just go here to 2, it's going to put it in my column. Okay. I don't want it in there. So I got to go to columns, more columns, and say this point forward. And, oh, I didn't set it though. Sorry. So I'd say 2 columns, this point forward, and then it's not going to include my title. Okay. So, and then to get rid of a column, I just go back to 1 and it will get rid of it. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to where I just was, where I went into columns and I had 2 and I said this point forward. Now, what if I'm like, okay, but I really want this to just take up half the page. So I could come down here to the end of the word blank. And you remember page breaks. Okay, page breaks was Control Enter. It said this, I want to start a new page here no matter what. Columns can do the same thing. So I'm going to go to breaks and do a column break. And I might want to get rid of that enter. But now I got to choose where the separation occurred. Also, in letters or in columns, you're almost always going to want to come in here and change your justification to justify, so it's even on both sides. That makes it look really nice. Okay. Another thing in columns is you can decide. I'm going to go to. Sometimes it's easier just to highlight the whole thing and then just do the selected text. Okay. But I want to change this, so I highlighted it because I'm changing something that already exists. And I'm going to change the spacing in between. So I can actually change. You can see the little image here, how much room is in between each thing, so it's a little bit less between. Another thing I can also do is I can add a line so that there's a line in between, which makes it look pretty clean and nice. Now you can also move the margin. We talked about indents earlier. Okay, an indent is great, but you see how it puts an indent on both sides? That's really not what I want. I want to move the actual margin. So that means I've got the 2-sided arrow and I click on just the line right here, the white and gray line, and I drag the whole thing over. Okay. So sometimes you want to do that because you want to put like a shape or a text box or something. You might see this in like newsletters. We'll do a newsletter later. But that way I have room to put in like a text box like this. And you have to do this in your practice today, but then I can put in a text box or a shape, either one, but it gives me a little bit more space there. Now there's another kind of break called a continuous break. So let's say I am making this little newsletter and then I want to move on and not be in a column anymore. If I press enter, I'm stuck in this column, but I want to get my cursor over here and I don't want to be in a column anymore. Okay. So I'm going to go to layout and go to breaks and I'm going to do continuous. And that does exactly that. I'm no longer stuck over here. I am still in 2 columns though. Okay. If I start typing, I'm still in 2 columns. Okay. But because I put a continuous break here, now I can go back and say 1 column, I'm no longer in it, and I can have something right. So if I have like a paragraph, I'll just type 1 in here. Now I was able to make it go all across. I can't do that with this margin though, right? So I can move the margin back over though, right? So but I got to highlight it. If I don't highlight it, it will change it for everything. Well, maybe not, but that's interesting. Oh, the continuous break makes it so I can bring it back. That's pretty cool. Okay, so that way I can have the margin moved over for just a section, but not for everything. If I didn't have a continuous break here, it wouldn't work that way. Okay, so in your assignments, just FYI, you have to create this, and that's exactly what I just did, right? I'm going to move this over. I think this is a shape. I can't remember if I think I told you. No, this is a text box. And then we have this over here, right? So anyway, that's how it's going to work. So yeah, if I wanted to put a different one in here, I wanted to put 2 columns in here and then add a break in it somewhere, this would just be a column break because I want it to move over. So basically I just created what you guys have to do in your assignment right there. If you want to pull in pictures, you can go grab like an online picture. I think I just have you grab a random one in the assignment. And you insert that. You're going to, by the way, if you ever insert a picture from online, it's going to put this in here. I always delete it because it just takes up space. But anyway, I can go in here and do tight. And because it's a column, it just moves around. It's so lovely, you know. If you want to use images, columns are the best. They don't work at all hardly in tables and tabs. It might make it screwed up and look weird. I don't know. I don't really use pictures with tabs, but it is great for columns because it just lets you put it right in the middle of everything. There is another type of column. When I go in to add columns, first of all, if I want more than 3, I have to do it here, right? I can do lots of columns if I do the numbers here. I can also do left and right columns where they're unequal, okay? So I can click on it and immediately set it that way, okay? And I can change the spacing between. I can actually customize it where I choose exactly how wide I want each column to be. So I have that freedom there, and the same thing with the right column. So I can actually set it to the custom length that I'd like it to be. You just got to make sure that it's no longer on equal column width, right? You want to turn that off, and you can do one of these too to make it unequal. Remember I showed you when we did breaks that you can see where your continuous breaks are. So if you want to get rid of it and you can't find it and you're having issues, remember that if you go to view and you go to outline, it will show you where your column breaks are, where your section break is. So if you put a column break in and you don't want it anymore and you don't know how to delete it, you have to go in here. And a lot of times if you're trying to do a table, or sorry, a columns, and it's behaving weirdly and you can't figure out why it's doing that, go into outline and you can use, oh, there's a section break in there and that's screwing everything up. So I can come in here and just delete that section break, but when I come back, it's going to be all weird, right? That section break really was holding everything together. So anyway, just know that's where you can go to actually see what you put in so you know where it's at. All right, that is it. We are done with this assignment. Just keep in mind that Lesson 4 is like kind of a review. There's a few extra new things added in Lesson 4, but there's going to be a lot more of this. So there's going to be a lot more tables and tabs and columns in Lesson 4 as well as in Lesson 3. So good luck with your application, and we will see you for Lesson 4.